Hello guys and welcome to History 240. My name is Sarah Stapleton and I'll be your professor for this semester. So going into this, I've gotten a couple of emails of people trying to understand things a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with going over the syllabus. So let me just pull this up real quick. So with this syllabus, the first thing that you'll notice is that I don't have any office hours. So with that, I am also a student along with being your professor. So right now I've gotten into the history of Kentucky, or excuse me, into the University of Kentucky, and I am a PhD student as well as being your professor for this. So no, I don't have any office hours, but if you guys need for me to come in, just call me and let me know or send me an email, and normally we can set something up to where I can meet with you if you need it. That being said, with that, I don't do any kind of makeup work because I'm not in town. So if you need to take a test late or something like that, that's not really something that I can help you guys with unless you guys go to the Student Center and you set it up with the Student Center. Along with being able to proctor exams and things like that. The Student Center is great if you guys have any kind of disability, any kind of educational issues, things like that. Those are all things that you guys will need to report to the Student Center, because the Student Center is going to be the ones who are able to help you the most. They can help you study, they can help you set up ways to learn the material better, those kinds of things. And just as a heads up for you, if you guys have a disability, your professors are not required to help you unless you have seen somebody at the Student Center and you have let them know about your disability. So make sure that you guys do that. Another thing, email is usually the best way to get a hold of me. I can usually answer emails within about 48 hours or so. So make sure that you try to get a hold of me that way. So, that being said, don't expect an email back immediately. 48 hours is a good rule of thumb for when I can answer emails. I don't answer them in the middle of the night. And with that, you guys need to make sure that you appropriately address your emails. So, being your professor, the way that I expect emails to come in is at least with a salutation. Good morning, Professor Sarah, or good morning, Sarah. Anything that says, hey, this is who I'm talking to. Make sure you put your name on there. I'm going to be teaching 3 other classes this semester, so make sure you put what class you're actually in. I haven't learned your guys' names yet. I don't know who you are beyond the name that comes up in your email address. So it's kind of hard for me to say, hey, it's nice to meet you, things like that, if I have no idea who you are. So make sure you let me know, hey, I'm in this class, so, I can more appropriately answer your emails. Make sure you guys are reading the syllabus, because some of the questions that you have are going to be handled in your syllabus. So just fair warning for you there. And if you send me an email that is answered in the syllabus, normally I'm not going to answer you with a full-on answer. I'm going to say refer to the syllabus. So make sure you guys read and that you understand the syllabus. Now, if you have questions about the syllabus, feel free to email me and ask me questions about the syllabus. I'll be more than happy to clarify anything you guys want, but make sure that you actually read it first. So going on from that, with this, you guys are only here for the next couple of months, so it's only fall semester that you guys will be with me. The semester, I believe, ends on the 14th of December. This is 3 credit hours. You are required to have a textbook, and you are required to read the textbook. The textbook is by James Clotter and Frida Clotter. It's called A Concise History of Kentucky. And with this, being a student too, I know that funds are tight, so I intentionally got a book that's a little less expensive, so that way if you guys have trouble getting it from the bookstore, like I've heard you guys are having issues with, it'll be cheap and easy to get a hold of online. So this book is running approximately $10 to $20 online. It is available in ebook, so if you guys are more comfortable doing that, that's fine too. It's, I believe, $9.99 as an ebook. It's very easy to get a hold of. For those of you who prefer to have a hard copy book but you're not able to get it yet, for your first assignment that's due from the book, you can actually read a preview of the first chapter and the preface online. If you just Google the book and you look at Google Books, you can do a preview of this book, so that you have your first assignment available, or you're able to do your first assignment based on this book. So I hope that helps you guys out just a little bit this semester. I know that being a student, this is never easy, and online classes are particularly hard. You have to be extremely structured when you go into these classes. You have to be willing to sit down and actually read your book, because most of your assignments are not going to be little piddly assignments where you have 20 minutes of discussion, or where you guys will just simply discuss the book as a class. This is all on you, and you have to be extremely structured when you go into this, okay? So keep that in mind, that these kinds of classes are infinitely harder than classes where you go in and you sit down and you have somebody who preaches to you for an hour and then you guys go home. That's not what this is like at all. So, keep that in mind as we go through this. That being said, if you have problems, please let me know. I can't help you if I don't know what your problems are. So if you're having problems with your ebook, if you're having problems getting Blackboard to accept your assignment, I only accept assignments over Blackboard. But if you're having an issue and you need to turn it in, but you're trying to turn it in and you can't, I can't help you out if I don't know about the issue. Okay? So make sure you guys let me know what's going on. If there's some kind of issue where there's inclement weather, things like that, your deadlines still apply. So you guys need to make sure that you are turning your assignments in on time, because after the time they are due, all assignments are due at 11:59 on Friday. So if you're attempting to turn your assignments in, 11:59 hits, it's going to disappear completely and you're not going to be able to turn your assignments in. But if you're trying to turn your assignments in and you're having issues, email me, say, Sarah, I'm having issues turning in my assignments. We can work something out after that, okay? So make sure you guys let me know what's going on. Beyond that, if you guys are able to keep up with the course like I'm expecting you to, then you guys should be able to turn your assignments in early. So there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to be turned in on time. So you guys have a class schedule. You know exactly when everything is due. Everything is due the exact same way every single week. So you'll have one chapter to turn in. By the time this is all over, you will have read the entire book, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not a bad book to read, so don't worry. The first chapter is less than 20 pages, so it's not a big sweat. The lectures will usually last about an hour. They'll be recorded like this. But don't worry, they don't last long. I try to keep them fairly entertaining. We'll just kind of see how things go. This is the first time I've taught an online course, so as we go along, if you guys have some constructive ways of letting me know, hey, this is an issue that we're having, or hey, I think you could do this differently, email me and let me know about that. Like I said, this is my first semester doing this, so I'm very open to doing things differently and making things work for you guys. So let's go on from here. Things that you'll need. You guys will need to have the textbook. And I will also let you know some things that will help you as you go along through the semester, and tips that have helped me in my studies. So what will happen is you guys will get a copy of the PowerPoints that I normally use in my classes. And these are things that I use to remind me what I'm teaching on. So you guys can use those to help you do well on your test. So what I do is I recommend you print those off and you go through them as we go through them together on this site. It's a good idea to get a couple different colored highlighters. If it makes you guys feel more comfortable using more, great, but normally 3 is the minimum. All of my tests are based on people, places, and terms. So if you have 3 different colored highlighters, and as we go through the PowerPoint, you highlight people in one color, places in one color, and terms in one color, then you essentially have the whole test right there, and that's a great way to study. So you guys can just write down your people, places, and terms after each class period, and then go through and create definitions for them, do flashcards for them, do whatever it is that helps you to study for your test. But if you do that weekly, then you have a study guide for your entire test. And these tests are not simple tests. You simply have people, places, and terms. That's all you have to help you. And we're going to do a whole lot, and a whole lot of these people, places, and terms kind of overlap. So you can study one thing by studying another thing. So if you're looking at people, you'll need to know where those people are from, what contribution they had to history, things like that, and they will help you to learn your places and your terms for other parts of the test as well. So you're kind of studying multiple things by studying just your people, studying just your places, and just your terms, and you're reiterating those as you study. So it's also good to have a little bit of paper to write these things down on. Sorry guys, got cut off there for a second. So moving on from the things that you'll need to have for the course, just as basic materials, you also need to have some basic knowledge. So when you come into this, you need to know how to use your email. You'll need to know how to navigate Blackboard. You'll need to have a basic understanding of how to use Microsoft Word, some basic skills in writing and things like that. I do expect you guys to write proficiently in your assignments, so use full sentences, use correct punctuation. All of those things are required. And I'm going to post some things that kind of help you along the way as well. So, ways to write good summaries, how I expect those to be formatted, things like that. Those will all be available to you guys. And I'm going to post more on Blackboard as we go throughout the semester as well. Have a decent understanding of how to use the internet. Most people these days have a basic understanding of how to use the internet, but if you don't have a basic understanding, this is going to be a really hard course for you. Hopefully that won't be so bad, but we'll kind of go into some of that other stuff here as we go on. So moving on to one of the big questions that all of the students have: how do you grade? Well, with this, when I grade, everything in the class will add up to 1,000 points if you get every single point that's available to you. I am going to have a few things that are extra credit throughout the semester, so if you're afraid that you might not do well, or you're a little afraid that you're lagging behind where you want to, there will be some opportunities for you. So as a basic way of understanding the way that I grade, if you are able to accumulate at minimum 900 points by the end of the semester, you will have an A. If you're able to accumulate at least 800 points by the end of the semester, you'll have a B. 700 points is a C, 600 points is a D, and those roughly approximate over to point values. So it's essentially a 10-point scale. So if you have 900 points, you essentially have a 90, and a 90 is an A. So I hope that that's clear to you guys. I know this is a little harder to understand, but when it comes to grading these things, it'll get easier as you see how I grade. Now, by the third test, or excuse me, by the first test, you guys should have 100 points available for the first test. Okay, so you should have approximately 350 points that are available by the first test. And so gauge your grading and where you are in the class on roughly how many points you have at that point in the class. So keep that in mind. So if you're sitting at about a 250, you're sitting at roughly a B. So make sure you're checking Blackboard to see how your points are running and those kinds of things. Just keep that in mind as we go along. So so as far as the class policies go, again, I do not accept any makeup work unless there is a university excused absence. But like I said earlier in this discussion, because you guys have the opportunity to do all of your assignments early, I will not take any kind of makeup work. This is an online class, so there's really no excuse for you guys not to be able to work on this and get your stuff done on time, because you have everything at your hands to be able to do the work. So going in from that, things that you need to know about actually doing the assignments. So each chapter assignment that's due for your summary and assessment, they are due starting next Friday. They are due. You have to read one chapter of your book each week. By the end of the semester, you'll have read the entire book. Do not plagiarize. If you plagiarize, you will fail your assignment. If you plagiarize again after that, I will be forced to turn you into the university, and you will either fail the course or you can be kicked out of the university for doing that. So don't do that. I will catch you. I caught 2 people last semester. It's not a good idea. I, as a historian, don't take well to it, and neither do any of your other professors. So don't do it. Not a good idea. With the summaries and assessments, the whole point of the summary is to get you guys used to identifying the main point of the information. I want you to get a good grasp of what the author is trying to get at. Why is he writing this? Why is he doing any of this? He's got a whole dang book. What do you need to read the book for? That's what you guys need to find out. And when you're doing that, make sure you're reading the subheadings, because they will give you evidence for why he's writing that particular chapter. The particular chapter may not come out and say directly, I am writing this because. Sometimes they will, but the majority of the time they won't. So you'll need to kind of play detective a little bit and try to figure out why exactly the professor is writing, or the author is writing this. So you'll need to look at the subheadings. You'll need to look at the sources in some of these. Just play detective. Find out what's going on. And then the subheadings will give you evidence for the main point. So if you can identify the main point, you can identify what the most important evidence is. Now, when you do the assessment, the summary is not a big deal to me. The summary just proves to me that you read it. The assessment is the meat of this assignment. So if you go in and you kind of take a critical eye at to your assignment and to what you're reading, it will help you tremendously. Gripe about it. Tell me what's wrong with it. If you agree with it, if you don't agree with it, tell me if there's better evidence out there. If you know of better evidence, I would love to hear about it. So take a really critical eye at this, you know, and not just, oh, this is really boring or this is poorly written. I mean, it's a historical study. It is going to be boring for people who aren't me, because I love this stuff and I'm a historian. So most people think this is insanely boring. I don't care about whether it's boring or not. I want to know what you think about what the author has written and whether or not it's relevant, because that's what you guys are going to be doing as effective members of society. You're going to be gauging whether or not something is accurate, whether or not something is important. We're trying to train you on thinking critically about what's going on around you. So make sure you guys are paying attention to that. You guys will be graded on your ability to follow directions in this. So you have to find the main point. You have to use good grammar, good sentence structure. You have to format it correctly. You have to get the page length in there. Your summary itself can be like 4 sentences, and I don't care. Make your assessment the rest of the 1 to 2 pages, and that's great. But if you're one of those people who are just getting used to assessing things, if you need to make your summary longer, fine. Make sure you at least have the assessment. What most people do in these kinds of cases is that they will kind of maybe dance around the main point and then put a summary but have no assessment. So the way that I would suggest formatting it is make your first sentence the main point of this chapter. So identify the author, identify the book, pretend I don't know what you're reading. So say something like, in A Concise History of Kentucky by James and Frida Clotter, the author argues blah, 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 blah. Tell me what their argument is. Tell me what the point of the chapter is, and then make sure that you have the chapter title in there as well. And then go on and support that with a little bit about a little bit from the chapter. So the pieces that have the most weight, make sure that you put those in there. And then from there, you can just go on and tell me what's great about the book. Tell me what's awful about the book. Tell me what surprised you, what you already knew about, things like that. And that will really help you as you go along through this. And it'll help kind of train you into doing a good assessment. Now, the primary source document analysis. The first thing you need to know is the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. A primary source is a written document that happened during that time, that was written during that time, a picture that was taken during that time, a map that was created during the time of whatever event is going on, a piece of pottery, a brooch, a piece of jewelry, just a piece of something that was constructed during the time that we're talking about. So let's say, for example, as we go on through this, we're going to be talking about the Paleo Indians. So a piece of pottery would count as a primary source for these Paleo Indians. So what you're going to do is you're going to tell me a little bit about this. So where did you find this piece of primary source documentation? What is its significance to history? What does it tell historians? So, you know, for example, a piece of pottery might tell you what kind of foods they were eating, what they were doing with the pottery, what kind of inks they were using. So it tells you kind of about their commerce, their trade, their economy, things like that. So keep those in mind while you're writing this. Make sure that you kind of guide me to where you're getting these sources from as well. And just kind of follow the instructions on the primary source document analysis. Now, that being said, you guys need to know what aren't primary sources. So generally, books that are written about a time period are not primary sources. Those are secondary sources. So they're examining primary sources and writing a history based off of it. So I'm a Viking historian, so just to kind of give you, wrap your mind around what I'm talking about. You have a book by a guy named Jesse Byock. Jesse Byock was not a Viking himself, but he looks at sources from 1300s, 1400s that were written by Vikings. He looks at archaeology, he looks at geography, geology. Everything kind of comes together to give him information about who the Vikings were and what they were doing, and then he writes a book on Vikings based off of that. So that should kind of tell you a little bit about what a secondary source is. So if it's a newspaper article about an earlier time, that's a secondary source. If it's a newspaper article written during that time telling you about what happened, that's primary source. If it's a history that somebody is telling because they were there, that's a primary source. If it's something like on the History Channel, that's a secondary source. So I hope that's clear to you guys. If you have any questions, make sure that you email me and let me know. This is hard for those who aren't historians to understand generally. So, you know, just keep that in mind. It is kind of a hard thing to kind of wrap your mind around, but just as a rule of thumb, if it happened during the time, primary source. If it happened after the time, secondary source, okay? Journal articles also count as secondary sources. So, moving on from that, you have one essay. I really can't help you guys much with the essay. Follow the guidelines. Your rubric is there. So, make sure you read the rubric. Make sure you read every piece of the essay. And when we get closer to the essay, I'll kind of tell you guys a little bit more about it. The tests are going to be 50 questions. They're going to be worth 4 points apiece, and they will add up to, actually they should be 25 questions, 25 questions at 4 points apiece, and they'll add up to 100 total points. So make sure you guys are studying for that. These tests, like I said, they're not easy tests. They're going to be based on people, places, and terms. Normally, I have an essay that goes along with it that kind of helps those people who aren't multiple choice kind of people. But with this kind of online class, we're not able to do that. So just keep that in mind. So now that we've covered pretty much everything in the syllabus, we're going to move on to the lecture itself. And I know this has been a lot of information to dump on you all at once, but this is where the fun stuff happens. Yay! We get to go in fun stuff! Woohoo! All right, so let's go on to the PowerPoint. So now I'm going to upload the PowerPoint onto Blackboard, print it off, get it ready, pause me if you need to. Oh, and by the way, you can pause me anytime you want and come back to me. So if you get sick of my voice, you can just walk away for an hour and go have dinner with your family and then come back to me. Yay! So now we get to go on to the fun stuff. So let me pull up my copy here. And hopefully you guys don't get cut off here, but we'll see. So your first PowerPoint is going to be Kentucky. And I'm just going to give you guys some general info about Kentucky. This is Kentucky history. So let's go to the first slide. First slide, this is a map of Kentucky, as you guys have probably guessed. Gives you a good idea of where major cities are in Kentucky. So some of the major ones, Ashland is on there, Paducah is on there, Lexington, Richmond, Frankfort, which is the capital of Kentucky. Surprisingly, Louisville is not on this map, which I think is kind of ridiculous, but that's okay. Kentucky is one of the smaller states in the United States. It's the 37th largest state. So it's kind of lower on the end of large states. But it is the only state in the United States that has waterways on 3 of its sides. It is also the second state for most navigable rivers in the country. The only other one that has more rivers that boats can go up and down is Alaska. But Alaska is also enormous. So I personally think Kentucky should get the award for most navigable rivers per square mile. But that's just me. So moving on from there, we're going to kind of discuss the different regions of Kentucky. Now, Kentucky has 5 distinct regions. Some historians consider there to be 6 distinct regions, but some of them kind of get looped together. So when you go on to this next slide, you'll see some different regions. The Eastern Mountains or Eastern Coalfields is your first region, and with this, it's exactly what you'd expect. It's a mountainous area. It's got coal throughout it. It's very rural. There aren't many large cities there. So it's not really one of those places that are easily inhabited. It's one of those places where you see more poverty. There's not a whole lot of economic growth going on there at this time. So keep that in mind as we go through the history of the state. You have the bluegrass, which is usually considered one large region, but sometimes gets broken up into 2, where you have the bluegrass region and the knobs. And the knobs are kind of a hilly area within the bluegrass area, so it's kind of acting like the foothills of the mountains in that region. Then you have the pennyroyal, which is mostly flat plains. It's filled up with farmland. So there's some economic growth going on there. There's a lot of tobacco fields, corn, soybeans are becoming a big commodity in Kentucky. It's named after this little teeny tiny blue flower called pennyroyal, sometimes called the pennyroyal, depending on who you talk to. And so the spelling varies with that as well. You then, moving on from that westward, you have the western coal fields, exactly what you would expect. They're coal fields. And then you have the Jackson Purchase, which is purchased a little bit after the rest of Kentucky is established as a commonwealth. Originally, Kentucky was part of Virginia, and then it kind of separated from Virginia and became its own state in 1792. Now, with that, most people are like, oh no, that's not a state, it's a commonwealth. Commonwealth and state can be used interchangeably. There are 4 commonwealths in our country, Kentucky being one of them. The other is Virginia and Connecticut, and I believe Rhode Island is our 4th, but I'm not 100% positive about that one. But Kentucky is a commonwealth, and it was established as a place where the common good, the common wealth of the people would be considered in its lawmakings. So that's essentially all a commonwealth is that it says in its constitution that it's going to take the wealth of the common man and the common Kentuckian into considerations when it makes its laws. So let's move on. Going on from that, most people who are from Kentucky have no idea what is going on in their state flag. And, you know, it's kind of one of those things that you don't really think about very often, but when you really get into it, there's a whole lot of significance going on there. So if you look at your flag, which you'll see on your next slide, you'll see a couple of distinct features in it. You'll see 2 people, you'll see some flowers that are going around the side of it, and then you'll see some words. You've got the Commonwealth of Kentucky, united we stand, divided we fall. And each one of those has a distinct history behind it. Now, the flowers that are on there are probably the easiest to tell you about. They're goldenrod. They're a weed, but they're a very pretty weed. They are the state flower of Kentucky. Then you have the 2 men who are standing there, Henry Clay and Daniel Boone. And we'll go into those a little bit more as we progress through the course. So hold on to those guys, okay? And then you have United We Stand, Divided We Fall, which comes from the Liberty Song or the Revolutionary War Song, depending on which source you're taking the name from. Now, if you go on to the next slide and you kind of hang out on Blackboard a little bit, there are 2 links there. And with that, you have the link for My Old Kentucky Home, which is the state song, and then you have the Liberty Song, which is where the words from your state flag come from. The Liberty Song is awful, but it's part of your flag, so you should at least listen to a little bit of it. And then you've got, of course, My Kentucky Home. So going on from there, let's get some demographics generally of what's going on in Kentucky. District 1 is where your state representatives come from. We have 120 different counties in Kentucky, and District 1 is made up of a huge portion of those. This goes into the coal fields, it goes into the Jackson Purchase, it goes into the Pennyroyal, so it takes up a huge amount of land. So keep that in mind as we're talking about demographics here. The leader of that is a man named James Comer. He's a Republican. Most of your representatives here in Kentucky are Republican. You only have 1 Democratic representative in the entire state, and we'll kind of meet him as we go through. Going on from him, you have District 2, which is the majority of the Pennyroyals and just a little bit of the coal fields. His name is Brett Guthrie, also a Republican. Moving on from him, the only Democrat. His name is John Yarmouth, and he's really one of the only people in the state who's representing the state at all who is a Democrat. And there's a kind of an important reason for why he is the only Democrat. The majority of people who vote Democratically are usually city dwellers. John Yarmouth is the representative, and he takes care of Louisville. And it's pretty much only Louisville that he takes care of. The rest of the state is largely rural, so most of the rural areas tend to fall under Republican lines. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Moving on from him, you've got District 4, which takes care of Ashland, the Cincinnati area, kind of that northern edge going along the river. He takes care, his name is Thomas Massey, and he takes care of that area that is mostly the bluegrass areas, and part of the knobs. Going on from him, we have Hal Rogers, who takes care of the eastern coal fields, and Andy Barr, who takes care of the Lexington-Frankfort area. And like I said, most of those areas are largely rural, so they're largely Republican. So that's a pretty easy way to remember that, as well as where the Democratic and the Republican lines fall is between the rural and the heavily populated urban areas. You have a couple of other general people who are looking after the welfare of your state. You have Senators Mitch McConnell, who is on your left, and Rand Paul, who is on your right. And these will represent you in Kentucky's General Assembly. Within the General Assembly, there is a Senate and there is a House of Representatives, just like there is in our federal government. Then moving on from there, you have a governor, who is Matt Bevin, on your left, and then a lieutenant governor, Janine Hampton. I'm not going to get into any of the politics beyond understanding the difference between the rural areas and the urban areas. It's not my business. I'm an Ohioan, so I'm not going to go into that. So we're going to move on to the actual history of Kentucky now that we've got a good feeling of who's representing our country, or excuse me, our state today, and where those lines are falling and how that's going to affect the areas that you guys live in. So let's go on to the past. We're going to go as far back as 10,000 BC. Yay! Really far back. So depending on where you fall, religiously, this may be a slightly contentious point, but historians have started the history of Kentucky all the way back to about 10,000 BC. And they say that most of the human population comes out of the middle of Africa. And from the middle of Africa, they're moving northward and then spreading out from there. And so they're very migratory. They have stone tools, and as they go along, they're passing over the ice bridge is the general understanding, and then over into North America from there. And they're going over into North America somewhere around 10,000 years ago, and they're moving over into Kentucky around 8,000 BC, and they believe that no more than 5,000 people total are in Kentucky by about 8,000 BC. Starting at about 8,000 BC, we're seeing the end of the Ice Age. We're seeing the start of modern foods, so things like squash and elk as a food source, deer as a food source, beaver, bison, those kinds of things. You're seeing varying techniques in hunting. So originally, most humans were hunting with simply spears. So big stick, sharpened rock on the end, you throw it as hard as you can and hope you hit something. Starting at about 8,000 BC, you start to see the development of the atlatl. Some people call it the dart. And essentially what it is you've got a stick, and it will have a little knob on the end of it, and then you have a spear, the same kind that you would have before. Sometimes it's a little bit shorter. And what they would do is they would stick it onto the knob, and then they would chuck it, and it would give that stick, the spear itself, a little bit more momentum and a little bit more torque to propel that harder, so it will go deeper into the animal and be likely to be more successful in killing that animal more quickly. Nobody wants to have to run down their food. Humans are not the fastest creatures in the world, and when it comes to chasing down a deer, if any of you guys have ever hunted, generally most agree that it's much easier to try to hit it with something than it is to chase it down. So, and that is really where we start seeing the beginnings of agriculture. We're starting to see humans start to settle down just a little bit. And especially when you start considering how important squash becomes. Not only is it a food, it also becomes useful as a container. It's being used as a house for your stuff. Humans are starting to accumulate things. They're not having to carry it around as much. And the squash is really the big piece in this period that's determining where people are living. So keep that in mind as we go through. On from there, you have the woodland period, which lasts from about 1000 BC to 1000 AD. So kind of bordering the birth of Christ is what we're talking about here. You'll see more people developing more of what we consider your modern foods. So sunflowers, corn becomes a big one, potatoes, tomato, and tobacco. You start seeing the development of pottery in Kentucky at about 1000 BC. And again, this is kind of holding the same purpose as squash, but these are more durable pieces. So with these durable pieces, you're getting more stability. You're getting to see more of a cultural development. Artwork is coming up, things like that, and they'll become more complex as time goes on. And this is really where we start having a better understanding of early Kentuckians, is when we start having something that will last to modern times that we can look back on them with. We start seeing arrowheads coming around at around this time. So with that, we know that based on where they are in the soil level, tells us how old these pieces are. So we're starting to see the development of the bow and arrow at around 800 AD. And then moving on from there, throughout this time, we're starting to see a development in consciousness with humans in general. So they're starting to, we can see that they're starting to think about the afterlife, and we're starting to see a more complex kind of culture develop out of their burial mounds. Just their burial mounds by themselves have significance, and granted, we can't know for certain what that significance is, but we can see that it is significant based on what they're leaving behind, and a lot of these things are being left in mounds. So a couple of prominent places you may have heard about with mounds and things like that, you have the Great Serpent Mound near Peebles, Ohio. There are a couple of Indian mounds in Ashland, Kentucky, so if you guys are from the Ashland area, you can see Indian mounds there. And they're kind of just placed throughout Ohio and Kentucky. So, you know, those are things for you guys to keep an eye out for. If you move on to the next slide, you can kind of see a general idea of how mounds were constructed. So generally, when you would have a significant member of a family pass, they would just kind of cover them over with dirt. And then as other significant members of the family would pass, they would kind of place them around or on top of those mounds and then continue to cover them up until you have a much larger mound. Sometimes you would have pieces placed in those mounds with them, but not always. So this is where we're seeing arrowheads, pottery, things of durability, you know, that are being placed in the mound to go along with bones and other forms of materials we can study. So that's really where we get a lot of our understanding of the culture going on at this period. Now moving into the late prehistoric period, this is starting around 1000 AD and moving up into 1750 AD. So as starting in around 1750, that's when we're really seeing expansion of Europeans into Kentucky. But at around 1000 AD, so about the time the Viking Age is ending in Europe, we're starting to see again, a continuation of the Stone Age, what we would consider a Stone Age for Native Americans in Kentucky, but an abundance of culture within that Stone Age. So we're starting to see two different types of cultures emerge. You're seeing the Mississippi culture, which is super complex. There's really large social structures, large mounds, temples almost. And one of the best examples of this is in a place called Cahokia. And it's in the the northern parts of the Midlands of the United States. So I think it's in Indiana. And there are places where at least 1,000 or more people are dwelling around these large sites. And you're seeing an abundance of social structure. So there's a very highly defined hierarchy there. And you can see that, and you can tell that based on the complexity of these places that they're building. Now, if you go on to the other culture, you see the ancient fort culture. They're extremely simple civilizations. So we're seeing smaller groups. They're still fairly mobile and still fairly migratory. And there's a good map of it on your slides here that kind of shows you where these towns are placed and how exactly they're focusing, what kind of groups that they're in, and even the types of Native Americans that are dwelling there. Generally, you'll see that they have round forts. So they will take big logs and they will, oh, excuse me, I've got a bug here. They will chop off the ends of that and then place them down in the dirt to kind of make a protective barrier between them and the outside world. Like I said, very simple, not a lot of culture going on there that we can see. Fairly primitive pieces of artwork coming out of there, and not nearly as complex socially or artistically or culturally as what we're seeing with the Mississippi culture. And that leads us into the European invasion, or what many Native Americans are now calling the Great Dying. So with that, we'll get more into that next week. So I hope this has been a good introduction for you guys of what's going on in this period. And if you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to do your primary source document analysis. Keep in mind some of the things that I've mentioned that make good primary sources. So arrowheads, pottery, pieces that go along with the atlatl, skins and hides and things that have had a little bit of a lasting impact. So we're covering more than 10,000 years of history here. So there's plenty that you guys can draw off of. And remember that we're trying to keep this basically in the United States. So if you happen to find a culture that is maybe in South America, maybe in the Western United States, those are okay because there's still a fairly complex social structure, which means that there's a lot of trading and economic stuff going on throughout the United States. So those are okay, but try your best to keep it at least in the U.S. So good luck, guys. Email me if you have any questions. I hope I didn't scare you guys too bad. I really think we're going to have a lot of fun and you guys are going to learn a lot this semester. But just remember, keep a good schedule. Email me if you have questions or issues. The best thing you guys can do is talk to me, okay? I'm your buddy. I'm your friend. I'm your professor, but I can help you. So keep that in mind. So talk to you guys next week. Have a good week. Bye.